What is up, everybody? Welcome in to episode 8 of Sell Liberty. I am your host, Jeremy Todd, and I am so excited to be with you today. It has been a busy few weeks here with the crew at Sell Liberty, myself and Brian, so we wanted to catch up with you guys and just talk a little shop. So without further ado, let's bring in the man, Brian Nichols. Brian, how
What's
are
up,
you, sir?
Jeremy?
Good to see you.
Doing good, my friend. How are you?
I'm so good. Man, what a crazy couple of weeks. I want to tell all the viewers and the listeners, thank you for allowing me to have a bit of a sabbatical. If you don't know, I was actively participating in the planning and creation of the AZLP convention, which was no small undertaking. It was a 3-day event held at a 5-star resort. We invested nearly $30,000, which is outlandish for a very small state party to do. We brought in Dave Smith. We had Spike speaking. We brought in Joe Jorgensen. Scott Horton was there and delivered the fire. And so it was there was a lot happening. And so I appreciate everybody giving me the time off. And then I got COVID at the convention, like a good libertarian should. But of course, everybody in my family is fine. We were down for about a day, and then it was just some time off from work. And so, yeah, man, glad to be back. It's been a busy month for you as well. Tell the good people what you've been up to.
Jeremy, I don't know if busy is the right word. It's been just an overwhelming let's be real, it's been the past 4 months, really. But the past month has been the most insane, specifically because I just wrapped up my move to Indiana. So I said goodbye to the Northeast, got out of Philadelphia and all the insanity that went along with that. It's really gotten weird out there, my friend. And to see out now in Indiana, just the change in demeanor with the people you talk with on a day-to-day basis. Yeah. I know I made the right choice, but I also was recovering from COVID there at the beginning of January. And then you couple that in with 2 weeks being at the in-laws as we were in between moving out of Philadelphia and into the home in Indiana. Shows have been a little bit on hiatus compared to the traditional 7 days a week I know the audience has grown used to. However, hey, we're kicking things off as we get started here in February. I know Sell Liberty's launching again. My show's getting back to the daily. We're going to have our special 10-minute solo episodes with some past guests. So I'm excited, my friend. And you know what? I'm hearing, I don't know about you, I'm hearing more and more people talking about the stuff that we've been talking about over at Sell Liberty and at the Brian Nichols Show past year and a half, 2 years. It's becoming part of the mainstream conversation.
Yeah, it was pretty awesome as I was walking around in my Reed Carnegie shirt at the LP convention. How many people were like, "Oh, you're talking about Dale Carnegie? Oh, have you heard of this Sell Liberty thing?" I'm like, "Yeah, I've heard a little bit about it." And no, it's pretty exciting. And what is really interesting is that we're talking more about having productive conversations rather than just spitting out our ideas. That was always the issue, and I think a lot of the rub where, and I talk about this in the presentation that we give sometimes at conventions about why does infighting exist, and it's because some people believe the message should be delivered this way, some people believe the message should be delivered this way. And we really have to have an effective approach to do things in sort of a multifaceted way. Which is
well, and really quick, Jeremy, you know what helps solve that right there is results. I actually posted this over on the Sell Liberty page today. Is that you see a lot of training focused on the features, the benefits, the things, but not a lot of training focused on the results, the outcomes. Right. And that's important because if you're focused on the things, which in this case it's the ideas or the values alone, we're talking about just how great our ideas are, how we're going to win in the battle place of ideas, which we will inevitably win. But if we're not taking it to the step of actually trying to help show the positive outcomes, show how those results become tangible, we're wasting our time.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that holds us back that I've been thinking about is that we may have these solutions and these ideas but there are a lot of times things that come up in conversation that are important to our coworkers, to our friends, to our family, as we're trying to persuade them over to believe the way and think the way that we think, to have the principles that we have, that we just don't have enough bodies to achieve a realistic result yet. And so we get stuck in that marketplace of ideas. So it's really about having these conversations that can win us the bodies that can start to do the things that are going to achieve results. We're seeing some things that are going to get those results. I think of crypto as one. We're starting to see mainstream catching on to that. Some civil disobedience up in Canada, which is awesome to see right now. There are things that are achieving results, but a lot of times there are conversations that our friends will want to have, and we don't necessarily have enough of data or enough bodies to create that result. So I wanted to get into how we can shift that conversation with those people that maybe we don't get to just point to results on and say, here's a different way to think about it. And the topic of framing came up, and one of the things that so back when we sold Cutco, which was my first sort of sales job where I learned how to do the whole sales process and all that. One of the rites of passage was we worked with a cookware company. And so the two always kind of went together, the kitchen knives and the cookware. And the kitchen knives were expensive. They were, $1,000 for sort of the first set you pitched. Which was to an 18-year-old, you're like, who can spend $1,000 on knives? The cookware,
there are $1,000 worth being spent on knives,
right?
Yeah,
all the time. But there were the cookware started at $2,300, and so it really took a separate training for us to start to, even the good salespeople, to wrap their head around somebody spending that much money at one point. And one of the things that always stuck with me is about how you frame what you're presenting in the conversation. And this was the example they always gave. Smart Water, not a sponsor. If I were to say, Brian,
line's open, by the way.
Yeah, right. Line's open. What is the value of this Smart Water right here? What would you say?
Oh man, if I had to guess, $2.75 at your local Sunoco.
$2.75, right? Okay, so I take this same water and I put it in this plastic cup I have sitting around my house at my wet bar or dry bar, whatever it may be. Now, what is the value?
Subjectively less and objectively less.
Right. It's significantly less, right? It's the same water. The only thing that changed is the frame in which it was presented.
Yep.
The product, the outcome is going to be exactly the same, but presenting it in two different frames has completely changed the perception of that product.
Jeremy, this reminds me of the Payless shoes store. Are you familiar with this out in France?
No, please. Yeah, I know about Payless, but tell me the story.
So this was before, I believe, they went bankrupt. And so what happened was they did an experiment out in France where they took the inventory from a Payless shoes and they just rebranded the entire store as a high-end shoe store. And they marked everything up significantly. In some places, it was up by like 300%, the upcharge. And not only did people go into the store, they ended up having more sales in the store just in raw inventory leaving the store, not even talking about the actual amount that was spent on those shoes. So just in the presentation alone and the way that you try to differentiate your product, or rather try to help, and again, I don't mean to go back to the idea of results, not necessarily looking at the quantifiable results, but also the emotional result you're trying to attach to your prospect. If you can help them see that really special thing, in this case, them wearing a sexy pair of shoes that makes them feel good because it's from an expensive store that they can now brag about that how expensive their shoes were. Oh, that makes them feel good. Little do they know they're walking around probably in $17 shoes from Payless.
Right. Yeah, and maybe that's the concept with libertarianism that is extremely important to understand, is that if we present our ideas just as they are as ideas, they are sort of very simplistic and pay less shoes in their way. They're very hands off, don't do anything, let natural order take its place, and good things come about because we have a lot of faith in people. But people want to feel some sort of emotional satisfaction, like they're doing something or getting so, and that's why you see these ideas from both the right and the left where they push for authoritarianism or they push for government intervention, that they come with this emotional satisfaction and good feeling almost that comes with it, like I'm doing something. So then the question becomes, well, how do we give them that with our ideas? And one of the ways that you can help do that is with framing. I think one really easy example to talk about is when you talk about the Second Amendment. I cringe now when I hear people talk about gun rights. Why would anybody fight for the right of a gun?
Exactly. There's nothing emotionally attaching there.
You're putting the very scary thing out in front with gun, and you're framing all your conversations about a right to own a fire, something that is designed to kill people, right? If instead we were to shift that conversation to the right to self-defense and only speak in terms of saying, well, it's a right to defense, that immediately changes people's perception, because now rather than them thinking of a weapon as an offensive thing, they think of it essentially as a defensive. And now you can start to have better conversations. It's not, why do I need an AR-15? It's because, well, I have better stability. If somebody were to break in my house in the middle of the night, I feel safer protecting my family with this. When things are presented in a very defensive way rather than an offensive way, that helps. And that's one way that reframing can happen, is stop talking about gun rights, start talking about a right to self-defense. What are you
and reframing away from the conversation about the object, right? Or so we talk about this, the features and benefits versus the actual right? So you're trying to get away from that feature in benefiting people to death, where you're talking about, in this case, the specificities of why you need an AR-15 versus name gun, or you go into the details of, well, did you know that most gun crimes are actually committed with pistols? And if you start to go into the stats and figures, and you try to out smart them to death and out evidence them to death, you're not going to get anywhere, because you're not hitting on the actual issue at hand. And that is, to your point, Jeremy, it's the self-defense issue. And if you can start to tailor it with the emotional attachment, and that right there, I think, is where sometimes libertarians we drop the ball a lot, is we want to avoid the emotional conversations, but emotions are one of the driving factors that motivates people to make buying decisions. And if we're ignoring that entirely, and we're only going in with the facts and figures, and we try to good idea people to death, we're just going to get resistance and pushback at the onset, because we're not entering into those conversations that they're likely already having. And why are they having those conversations? Because those conversations are striking them in some emotional way that's forcing that to be a top of mind issue.
Yeah, it's pushed it sort of to the front.
Right.
Look, this is another parallel that came to mind thinking about this. When I say football helmet, what do you think of, defensive or offensive?
I mean, I was a defensive player at the
right.
So.
But I guess the helmet itself, is it a defensive?
It's a defensive. It's defensive.
Right.
You never use your helmet.
However, here's the thing. However, there are entire rule structures now about using your helmet in an offensive way. So when we frame the gun argument similarly as, no, these are good, it's the same helmet, and it's positive if you use it defensively, but it's negative if you use it offensively. And you can absolutely use a football helmet offensively, even during the natural course of the game. It's the same thing with a gun argument. If it's used defensively only, well, then it can be a positive, a piece of equipment. It was essentially what it is. However, the moment you start to use it offensively, now you've violated the NAP according to libertarians, and there can be rules and repercussions against using things offensively. But those already exist. They already exist. right? We don't need more rules and regulations to create that. We don't need a targeting penalty on top of a unnecessary roughness penalty on top of a unsportsmanlike conduct penalty.
Sounds like
right?
a Cowboys game where you're watching. Jeez.
Right, exactly. So it's like, no, those things are already illegal. So if you talk to people that are in sort of the anti-gun camp or the gun regulation camp, their emotional satisfaction is coming from, well, these weapons are being used offensively for harm. And so you have to kind of have that in-depth conversation with them about, look, this is a tool that can be used offensively and defensively. We already have the laws and rules in place to prevent it from being used offensively. And when it is, those people are punished.
And let's think, too, what are some of, like, get away from the guns themselves.
Yeah.
Let's go to in that world, I'm going to say our opponents, right? The anti, we'll say, I'm just going to use the term, Second Amendment, gun rights, self-defense in this general conversation here. The best arguments you've heard against that have been always driven through an emotional appeal, right?
Very emotional.
And that's,
right.
and let's be real here. That's almost exclusively why you see a push nationally for gun control conversations right after a school shooting, immediately after a school shooting, because it's a top of mind issue and it's hitting people on an emotional trigger that's going to give them a little bit of a nudge, in this case, to make a switch, maybe, right? To make that status quo a little uneasy, where they're considering alternative solutions, especially if it hits close to home, right? If you were a parent of a kid who is in 1st through 3rd grade in 2012, Sandy Hook probably hit you pretty hard, right?
Yeah.
So if it may have impacted the way that you approached an issue based on the emotional connection you saw with that issue. So we have to take that into mind when we're talking about the issues that people are currently talking about. Because if we're approaching things already through the logic, the facts, and the figures, and we're not even talking the emotional appeal, how do we think we're even going to get on their radar when we're not even in the same stratosphere?
Yeah. And the way that you can make those emotional connections is by taking that conversation and reframing it in a different way. I think a lot of times in sales, just the simple switch between talking about price and calling something an investment instead. For instance, you're working on a big deal, nearly $500,000. If you throw out the price of $500,000, people are gonna kind of get some sticker shock there, because price is a negative, like you're taking from me, right? But if I'm taking that $500,000 and I'm investing it, I'm expecting to get something back in return for it. Yep. So similarly, changing that language in the way that we approach things is very effective at sort of dealing with those emotions that people go through on these issues and in that buying process. I want to get your thoughts on when people talk about, well, we just both went through COVID, right?
Yep.
When we talk about mandates, or somebody who is maybe in the pro-mandate, sort of pushing the vaccine camp on somebody who doesn't. What are some ways that you have been reframing that as when you're called an anti-vaxxer or somebody who just wants to kill grandma, right? How do you reframe that to talk about, no, this is actually my position?
Great question, Jeremy, because this is the conversation we're having right now, right? This is we're sitting on the dinner table. You have the in-law maybe ask you the question, you have the crazy aunt ask you the question, you have the grandma ask you the question, and you maybe don't feel prepared to have the conversation. So I think it's first important to start out with, who are you talking to? If it is somebody who is genuinely concerned for your well-being, right, and they're doing it on truly out of the kindness of your heart, right, then have the conversation in a non-emotional way. Like, listen to them, let them talk to you, but still be firm in your convictions. But if it is somebody who is actively going out of their way to, like, this is beyond a public health thing for them, this is now their political agenda. Yeah, candidly, and this is just my philosophy, they're not our market. So let's not even engage in the conversation with them, but rather let's overcome the objections that they're likely going to raise. And in doing that, we are in essence reframing the conversation. We're resetting the narrative. So if I ever have, the opportunity to talk to somebody who's more open-minded, right? And they're just genuinely asking me questions. Brian, you just went through COVID, but I know you're against the mandates. Tell me why. You can then, in your response, either A, go down a path of education based on the person you're talking to, or B, if they're going to be a little pushback and you can tell that they're maybe testing a little bit, you can then start to play the role of question master. And the better questions you can ask to figure out how they've gotten to where they are in their stance, right? Their position, the better you can understand of how they got to where they are, the better you can understand of how it is you can need to reverse engineer. So I would start off by figuring out who it is that you're talking to, number one. And then number two, understand how the person that you're speaking to got to where they are. So you have to take control of the conversation and know that that's your goal in the questions you're asking. Ask pointed questions. So, tell me, Jeremy, I understand that you're curious about my thoughts on the vaccine mandates. I'm just curious, what's your position? And how did you get to where you are today? Let them explain their position. And as you go through and you start to establish a set of, really, they're establishing the facts for you, you can then take what they're talking about and the way that they present the information and then weave it back through. And really, if you start to weave the world of what they presented as the information, plus there's an underlying sense of understood morals and values, which I think the person we're talking to is in that kind of open market mindset. They're the people that we should be reaching out to because they're going to be on the same maybe moral playing field as we are. And I would say it's the people who are just kind of open to understanding that what's been happening over the past 2 years isn't the way forward. The people who are out there in the complete opposite, though, I don't understand why we waste our time, why we waste our efforts. And candidly, that's where I think we're going to have a lot more success is instead of just going out and trying to present all of our information about how right we've been, we need to instead go ahead and really hit the people on the emotional things that they've been focusing on, that they've been having the conversations about. So going back to your original question, Jeremy, I don't think we need to have the debates, the arguments, and really play defense. I think we can almost take it's like you don't go in and sell to your competitor, right? I'm in the greater telecommunication cybersecurity industry. I'm not going to pick up the phone and call one of my top competitors trying to sell them a hosted unified communications platform, right? That wouldn't make sense. So somebody who is completely vehemently against our way of doing things and our way of thinking, right? I don't even see them as a viable customer. And in this case, somebody who's going to be on our team, they can maybe change at some point, and there's going to be trigger events that will likely happen in their world, and things always change, right? That's just life. So as things change in their world, and whatever that might be, we can touch back in and see where they are. And if there is an opportunity to bring them onto the conversation, we can do that then. But know who our market is, I think, is going to be the most important thing here. And then with that, focusing on asking really, really good questions to reverse engineer how they got to where they are.
Yeah, I agree. That is the process 101. So one of the things I think that COVID has really revealed about libertarians is that we're not very good at understanding the difference between what we should be allowed to do and what we have a right to do and what is right to do. And I think this came up a lot of times. It's could versus should, and then the other one is if our, and this really got to me, and I think I some people in the LP might catch some flack on this for me, but Marshall Burt, our highest elected libertarian right now, state senator in I believe it's Wyoming, voted for a bill. And he was very emotional when he voted for it, or voted against a bill that would basically fire him from his job. Basically, he was protecting a private company's rights to enforce vaccine mandates. And he said, this is going to cost me my job. And I think there is a point where we have to look at our principles, but also the intentions of our principles. And the intentions of our principles are to increase individual freedom, increase individual liberty. And so if our principles decrease individual liberty when applied, perhaps we need to take a look at, is this a situation of what we have a right to do versus what is right to do? And how do you have that conversation with somebody when you're like, or at least this is how I have that conversation with folks. I go, look, the reality is the vaccines were probably 6 months too slow. It probably shouldn't have taken as long for them to come to market as they did. People should have had the ability to inject this stuff. If I believe somebody has a right to inject heroin into their body, I think they should have the right to inject Pfizer's experimental vaccine into their body too, right? So I think, on one hand, the vaccine was probably 6 months too slow being rolled out. But on the other hand, the idea of mandating and forcing people to consume it is also a problem. So there is a great concept of what you have a right to do and what is right to do, and how those two can conflict. How do you have, or what are some conversations where you've been in that situation where you're like, look, you have a right to inject yourself with heroin. It's your body. You own your bodily autonomy, but it is not the right thing to do, and you should not be doing it on children's playgrounds and, whatever the conversation leads to.
Yeah, well, I mean, let's go back to something that's really personal for me, and that is, I used to be really, really morbidly obese. I was 385 pounds. I was a big guy, and my behavior was, it was killing me. I was literally eating myself to death, and it took a really good personal family doctor to sit me down and be like, Brian, you're 17, you're going to kill yourself by just eating yourself to death. And after I took that really to heart, and I made a big change. I lost 180 pounds of fat over about a 2.5-year period. And it was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do, but it jump started me into like the fitness world, or just the idea of not just living a healthy lifestyle, but also helping show other people who are facing those challenges that they can do it too. And the value that brings to them in terms of living a better life. And right there, I will never mandate that somebody needs to go to the gym, 3 to 5 times a week based on, their fitness level. I'm never going to mandate that somebody has to have a certain BMI or be able to bench press a certain weight. That'd be insanity. But at the same point in time, if you look at the counter of what some other people have been proposing, they would love nothing more than to force your average person to, in this case, take an experimental vaccine, an mRNA vaccine. And that right there, I think, is an argument that we don't even need to enter into, because from just a complete moral standpoint, it is absurd in its face. And if we present it as such an absurd notion, we can then, back to what we were talking about before, instead of just addressing the narrative and entering into that framing they presented, we can reframe the conversation, and then in that perspective, almost reset that narrative.
Absolutely. And
did that answer your question? I hope it did.
It did. No,
okay.
I think you had a really great story about should versus could, but so we enter these libertarian arguments all the time about like what is libertarian. And we had there was one, right, there was, and the reality is people don't care what is and isn't libertarian. So the
does it matter?
Reality is,
honestly,
it doesn't matter. So
it does, but like does the conversation matter? No.
Right. No, it does not matter in what people are looking for as far as their solutions. They want outcomes, like you mentioned earlier. But so for, they'll say, well, it's not libertarian to, I don't even want to acknowledge it because I literally don't care about it. But everybody, we've had this spat about freaking immigration now for 2 months, right?
Yeah,
and
we did.
On one hand, we're talking about, and what's happening is people in this conversation are talking past one another.
Yep.
In that
they don't want to. They don't want to have a resolution. They want to be right.
Exactly. It's not. But the real difference is between what does somebody have a right to do and what is right to do. So on one hand, it's my belief system that maybe it is right to not restrict people based on borders, right? I would see that as me potentially restricting their individual liberty. However, there are other people who have paid taxes, who have done these things, if you're going to force them to pay for something, they should get a say in what happens to that public domain and property. And
Jeremy,
stuff like that.
are you telling me that there are lots and lots and lots of variables that go into certain issues that make
So
issues
many.
a lot more than simple
Right.
black and white? Yes, no. How shocking is that for libertarians to
man.
come to this revelation that maybe it's
know.
not a conversation of are you open borders or closed borders, but rather can you be a rational, logical, thinking human being with critical thinking skills and approach each individual situation as what it is, an individual situation.
Right. Yes, yeah, but no, we're not interested in that. We're interested in finding the real libertarian in the room. Who's the real libertarian?
Please stand up. The entire room stands up.
This is the way that I feel about it. Is that again? It comes back to libertarianism is a set of principles, and then it's the different applications of those principles. And there are a lot of debates and arguments where good people who are libertarians can use libertarian principles to justify a couple different things, and we get these debates. And I think it's very silly if our goal is growth to try and settle those debates in order to but because it takes away from what the mission right now should be. We are the minority. And so what I want is I want to introduce these principles to people and then have them decide how they feel about immigration, rather than tell them this is what our principles say about immigration. Now decide if you agree with our principles, right? Let them embrace the ideology and then explore these things on their own is the way that I feel about it. I don't want somebody deciding if they are a libertarian or not because of how they feel about immigration or how they feel about drugs or how they feel about this one issue. I want them to say, this package of principles makes sense to me. Now what I'm going to do is go through and explore each individual one.
This just made me think of just imagine, right? Just imagine this situation. You're a CIO in a company, chief information officer, for those playing the home game at a company. And one of my reps back when I led my sales team, because now I'm back into enterprise sales. Yeah, baby. But one of my sales teams called in and they said, "Hi, Mr. CIO. My company is ABC Corporation. We service companies between 50 and 5,000 employees, between 3 and 30 locations," and they just list off all the different kind of organizations we could help and who we are, and then just left it at that, right? Yeah. Hey, do you think that based on who we are, you want to do business with us? What does that matter? Mm-hmm. What does who we are matter to how we can help the prospect, right? And that there is where we lose the argument all the time, because when people just hear us regurgitating how awesome we are and what our ideas are, which we know how awesome we are, let's be real. Yeah. We don't need to talk about it all the time, but rather instead of just focusing on preaching principles and talking in that principle speak, we have to reframe our language. We have to speak the language of our customers. In this case, the people who aren't already libertarian. Gasp. Yes. I know. Shocking. That there are people that we should talk to who aren't already libertarian. And with that, they are not already speaking the language of our principles. So when we're going in and just talking about how great we are on these certain principles, it's white noise. So yeah that's fun.
Yeah. You're you're 1,000% correct on that. And reframing it comes back to, what is the and I think you hit on it, and I think we can wrap on that as a final thought, in that we have to continue to remember that even though we live in sort of this libertarian liberty movement bubble, our conversations have to at some point turn outward.
Yep.
And we have to start having conversations with one another, because it's like when you go to the office and you're around a sales team, there's a little bit of talk about sports, there's a little bit of talk about life, but there's a whole lot of talk about work, right? You're talking shop around the water cooler. What did you say in this? But you talk about your customers, you talk about your approaches, you talk about what you do. And if we as libertarians ever want to be successful, we have to have that water cooler conversation with each other where we're sharpening the axe, where we're getting better. And rather than having these intellectual, philosophical debates that don't change anything in the world, we talk about how we're having these outward conversations with people, and then focus our energy, like you said, on having conversations with people who are not libertarians, because having deeper conversations with libertarians at this point who already get it isn't going to change the world. And if our goal is to change the world, we have to change more people around us. And that's something we'll be presenting at conventions. I'm going to call it the rule of two. It's very pyramid scheme looking, but it's the reality that each one teach one. If we take it over 12 months. So if everybody who voted for Joe Jorgensen, which was not
hear this.
Right, hear this. If everybody who voted for Joe Jorgensen were to have a conversation and convince two people over the next 2 years, or over the next year, and then that group, another two people over the next 2 years, within one cycle by 2024, I believe we are at almost 6 million votes. And then if you go through one more cycle, we're over 35%. We've completely wrecked the entire. So it's that simple about having and winning one or two hearts. And if we just focus on that, and I'm saying that about external conversations.
Bingo.
Rather than internal conversations.
Yes.
So that's my final thought. Any other final thoughts for you, sir?
Housekeeping. I will be up in Waukesha, Wisconsin on February 16th. No, February 9th. Wait, no, it is the 16th. I can do math. Yeah, the 16th. And I can also read a calendar, believe it or not, too. David Bellman from Bellman Homes. He was on the program. And great mentor and awesome podcast over on his show. I think it's called Your Home Building Hero. But anyways, long story short, he is a part of a networking group called Young Guns up in the northern Midwest. And I am one of 3 speakers who will be going up, and I'm going to be covering how to protect your business from both cybersecurity threats, but also from big tech censorship. So if you're up in the Midwest, please head over to Eventbrite and search Young Guns Winter Summit and 2022. And I'll be one of the featured speakers there. I think the tickets are on sale now through the next 2 weeks. So make sure you go ahead and get that. Also, I will be doing a presentation for Young Voices on how to help sell your podcast. So Caleb Franz, great friend and also working over at Young Voices, reached out. So I will be doing a presentation there that following, I think it's that Friday, which is the 19th. I'm sorry, that's Saturday. That's Saturday the 19th. So if anybody's interested from Young Voices, or if they're interested in joining Young Voices, which is a great opportunity to go ahead and become a better speaker, a better writer in the greater liberty movement, especially for those in obviously the younger demographic, please feel free to reach out to Caleb Franz. He can point you in the right direction. But then final thoughts for today's episode, Jeremy, besides the housekeeping and events and stuff. Number one, I'm super excited to hit the ground running here because February is going to be really where we're taking what we set the groundwork for in 2021 with having you on the show, with having Chris in the show, with building out the network that we've been working on growing here for the past now at the Brian Nichols Show for over 4 years. And we're really going to blow this thing up because as we talked about on the show today, we're hearing the conversations not just in the greater liberty movement, but across really the world starting to change. And the reason people are starting to ask more questions is because as we've started to speak truth consistently, it gets hard to silence the truth speakers because after a while, you can only have a narrative running for so long that can captivate so many people at one given time, where your average person will start to wake up and say, this person has been saying the same thing this entire time, and they've seemingly been shown to be right. And one look no further than Ron Paul. Authenticity sells. So I would challenge, as we go, there you go, that's right. I would challenge everyone today who's listening to the episode to please do Jeremy and I a favor. And that is to go ahead and make it a point to make sure you're going out and you're talking to other individuals who are going to go out and help grow this movement beyond just going and talking in our echo chambers and really try to make the world a better place. Because right now, we are in one of the biggest trigger event moments of our lifetimes where people are asking so many questions. Let's be the people there to have some answers, but also in return, make sure we're asking phenomenal questions, focusing on the issues they care about, and make sure we're addressing not just the features and the benefits, but rather focusing on the positive outcomes and solutions for not us, but for our customer. Jeremy, that's my final thoughts for the show.
Absolutely. Well, Brian, thank you so much. Yes, go out, take on the world. This is a very unique opportunity where people are starting to see that the tyranny of government is against the people, and we are starting to rise up. The moment is now. Have those conversations. Do not be afraid. Talk to coworkers, talk to friends, talk to family. Be brave, tell the truth, but do it in a smart way. And if you want to know how to do the smart way, plug your ebook.
Yes, we have 4 easy steps you can implement now to help sell Liberty to friends and family. By the way, that's a free tool that you will go ahead and download. Also, if you sign up for my morning sales huddle, which is every single week, Monday through Friday around ballpark 5 to 7 a.m. or so, I send over a morning email to my email subscribers, which is going through literally the basics of sales and marketing as they pertain to our greater political world. But also, if you're just an average run-of-the-mill sales pro executive who's trying to get your game stepped up a notch, that's also where we're talking about things that are working right now in real life sales, things I'm using when I'm reaching out to prospects, things I taught my team that helped us get to 43% of my entire company's revenue. These methods work. Nice. So if folks are interested, yes, sign up over at briannicholsshow.com. You can sign up for the ebook right there. And also you'll be signed up for the morning sales huddle. Thank you, Jeremy.
Absolutely.
I'm glad you remembered to plug my book. I would have forgotten. So, yeah.
Oh, it's all good. Well, appreciate it. Glad to be back, my man.
Yes.
We'll see you next time.
Have a good one, folks. Thank you, man. Yeah. Oh, yeah.